All right, so first flight, second battery. It felt very natural, I would say. I think that's probably one of the easiest words to say is it felt very natural to fly this thing this size through the park, through the trees, around the light posts. That's something that me as a GPS flyer photographer would probably never do, even with the Mavic. The immersive experience with the goggles makes it super easy. And I was making passes I think you guys know I probably would not make, which you guys haven't seen on the channel because I just wouldn't make them with any other drone, even the first gen FPV, because of my I would say lack of experience in FPV. This thing made it feel really, really easy. Now it's been about a year and a half since DJI released this right here, the DJI FPV drone. Now here we are in August 2022, and we finally have version 2, or the newest FPV drone from DJI. This is called the DJI Avata. Now, for those familiar with my channel, you guys know I am a photography first flyer, which means I normally will go out there and look for photography stuff to capture first, and then I'll normally do video. And I never really dove too deep into FPV because I understand there is hours and hours and hours on the sticks that you need to do, and also just a lot of knowledge as far as building a lot of these types of drones from scratch. Well, not these type of drones, but doing full DIY builds. And because I'm into photography and videography more, I will normally lean towards the DJI Mavic lineups, as well as the Inspire, anything with the larger cameras, because for me, my primary reason of flying is to get high quality photography. Now, while I really do like this drone, after flying the Avata for the past week or two, I really believe that DJI should have released this type of drone first before this one. So in the video, let's of course talk about the Avata. We'll talk about some of the specs, but more importantly than that, I want to talk to you guys about my experience as we kind of break down all the categories of this new drone. And before we jump into all the specs and my experiences, a quick word from today's sponsor, Adobe Stock. And for those that don't know, I'm actually a designer by trade, graphic designer, web, all the way up to now. What I've been doing for the past 10 to 15 years now is user experience design. And being around design for pretty much my entire life, I've been in the Adobe suite. And that's the reason why Adobe Stock is one of the best places to go if you're looking for royalty-free images, photos, and even audio. I pretty much use Adobe Photoshop daily, and Adobe Stock is actually integrated into Photoshop and a lot of the other Adobe products. Now for me as a designer, I'm normally looking at getting a lot of royalty-free images to use in a lot of my layouts. However, if you are a creative photographer or videographer, a lot of people don't know you can actually be a contributor to Adobe Stock, which means you can upload your photos and video to Adobe Stock, and if it gets selected to be part of their collection, whenever someone like myself as a designer or videographer wants to use and license your photography or videography, you can continuously make royalties off of each one of those purchases. Now, like I mentioned, one of the biggest benefits of contributing to the Adobe collection is that your content is now part of the Adobe community. That way you're able to promote and license your own content and earn royalties while you sleep, because all your content will just be online available for download and purchase. I'll leave all the information on how to be a contributor down below in the video description. Once again, huge thanks to Adobe Stock for sponsoring this video. Now let's jump back into the Avata. Now, as you can see here, we have a completely new form factor as far as FPV drone goes from DJI. This was called the Avata. A lot different than the original FPV drone that they released last year. The size and the form factor very similar to a CineWhoop. It does have these propeller guards all the way around. And besides the drone looking a little bit different, we also have small and slimmer goggles for the new Avata. Now the naming convention, super confusing. Last year's generation was called the DJI FPV goggles V2. These are just called the DJI Goggles 2. However, if you do have this one right here, which was released last year with the first DJI FPV drone, don't worry, it is compatible with the new Avata. And I've actually made a full separate video unboxing all this right here and also talking about the packages and the versions that the Avata will be coming out with. So if you guys do want to see that video of the unboxing and also what product versions are going to be released, make sure you check out this video above as well as down below in the video description. Now, when it first released, it did have a larger form factor, larger footprint, and I think a lot of people were expecting something like this out of the box, but we got this one right here, which was a lot bigger and also a lot more intimidating when you got this thing up in the air. Now, the biggest difference when I first flew the Avata, actually my first and second flights up in the air, I was going through trees, I was going through areas that I wouldn't even do with this one, even after flying this one for a while now. There's definitely a huge difference when you're flying something that has a smaller form factor also has these bumpers here around the propellers. And there's also something about the flight characteristics of the Avata that makes it very, very smooth, whether you're flying with the motion controller, which initially I kind of thought was a little more gimmicky with the first FPV drone. But for some odd reason with the Avata, the motion controller is actually a lot more intuitive than I would have thought. Flying with both the remote control and the motion controller, you can definitely tell a huge difference as far as how smooth you're flying. You can definitely have a nice transition with the remote versus trying to do everything with the sticks. I already put these side by side. As you can see right here, we have the Avata and the first gen FPV drone. Smaller than the Mini 3 once it's opened up, or about the same. Actually, no, it's actually smaller than the Mini 3 Pro once the props and the arms are unfolded. Now, the one thing the Mini 3 does have over the Avata is that this thing does sit under the 250 gram mark. The Avata sits around 405 grams with the battery, with the camera on there. So under 250, you have a little over 400 grams on the Avata. Jumping over to the Avata camera, we do have a new sensor, a 1/1.7 inch CMOS sensor. And with that sensor, we do have a fixed aperture of 2.8. As far as video resolution, we do have 4K, 50 or 60 frames a second. And if you want to slow it down a little bit more, you have 1080p all the way up to 100 frames a second. Now, of course, I love photography first. This isn't a photography type of drone, but we do have a 12 megapixel camera on it. It does have JPEG only. We don't have any RAW capabilities. As far as shooting options with profiles, you do have the standard profile from DJI, which is actually pretty good out of the box, and they also have the CineLike. So if you do want to have a little bit more options in post-processing, a little flatter profile, they do have the CineLike. As far as field of view, we have 155 degree field of view, equivalent to a 12.6 millimeter lens. And also, as far as the tilt goes, we do have a negative 90 degree all the way up to a 70 degree tilt. Now, when it comes to flight time, they are rating this thing for 19 minutes of flight time. Of course, I'm going to go through and do a lot more tests. So if you guys want to see those results, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. But DJI is rating it for 19 minutes. The one thing I am happy to see that they did do and add is that we do have 20 gigs internal storage on this drone. That's one thing I think every drone, every action camera needs some sort of internal storage. So I am glad to see that they did add it in here. The one thing I do not like though about this drone is the positioning of where the card and the USB-C port is. Because of the fact that there is internal storage, you need access to it. And when you need access to it, you need to get to the USB port. And the port, for some odd reason, is inside one of the propeller guard areas. So you actually have to move the propeller to the side, pop the port open, and that will now give you access to the USB-C port, as well as where you're gonna be able to put your micro SD card in there. Now, when it comes to obstacle avoidance and sensing, we have a little change here because on the original FPV drone, we actually did have front sensors right there, as well as bottom sensors. On the new Avata, we have sensors only on the very bottom, which actually is fine because when I was flying the first gen or this FPV drone, and I had the obstacle avoidance on, what would happen is that it would always go and then it would slow down anytime it would sense something, which it's supposed to do. However, it actually kind of slowed your progression down because you'll be flying and all of a sudden it'll just kind of slow, hit the brakes. So you don't really have, or can get, unless you turn off the sensors, that nice fluid motion, even if you're flying close to object. You would have to always turn off those sensors. Now, when it comes to electronic image stabilization, now this isn't a traditional drone where you have a full 3-axis gimbal. You do have a lot of electronic image stabilization, very similar to what they have in their action cameras. They have the Rock Steady, we do have that here. We also have the Horizon Steady. So even if you're flying your drone, the horizon will actually maintain level if you have Horizon Steady on. When it comes to video correction, we do have standard mode. We also have wide angle and also a super wide angle. Now, being such a smaller platform, the one thing that we do not have on the new Avata is a quick release propellers. As we see here on the first gen one, we do have these quick release propellers. We do not have that on this one. You do have extra propellers that come with it, as well as the tool to replace them, but you do not have quick release ones like you did on the first one. Jumping over to the all new goggles, and actually these are really, really nice. The new goggles are a lot smaller, really slim, as you can see here. little side by side of these new goggles. They are a lot smaller, and what I do like about them is not only are they smaller, you're able to then plop these antennas down. So when it comes to storing them, this thing was always kind of funky. You don't know if you should I take the antennas off or not. With these new ones here, not only are they smaller in full size, but also the antennas, you don't have to take those off. You just push them down like so. And with that size difference, they did move a lot of these analog buttons here to a touchpad on the side. So if you wanted to access your menus, you would just use a bunch of gestures here, which is pretty cool. You just swipe through it, double tap if you want to go back out. The one thing I do like about these new goggles is the ability to fine tune your optics. Here on the back, you have these adjustments here at the very bottom, and also you're able to twist these for focus. When it comes to battery, we do have this similar 1800 milliamp battery that we had on the first gen one. The one thing I did like that they changed here, which they added a little hook. So if you were ever flying the first gen ones and you had your USB in here and you were to bang it around or move it, or if it fell out of your pocket or fell out of your sweater, which it almost always does, it would then disconnect from your cable. What they did here is add an additional little clip here so that you can't just drop it and it pops out and your goggles will go black. Now what's different this year with the FPV drone that DJI is releasing, the Avata, is that packages that they're selling are a little bit different. Instead of including a traditional remote control like this one, the combos you have to choose from actually include goggles as well as the motion controller. So they're actually marketing the motion controller as your primary remote, and then you can buy this remote control as an accessory. Now initially when I was flying the Avata, I was using the remote control because I was just used to it. The motion control, like I said, was one of the things where I thought was a little bit extra, but I ended up enjoying the motion controller when flying in sport mode or in normal mode. Just like the first generation FPV drone, you're able to fly in normal mode with GPS, sport mode, and GPS as well, but also go into full acro in manual mode. While you're out there flying, and if you have some sort of issue up in the air, if you're using the motion controller, all you do is hit that huge pause stop button right there. And on the remote control, if you are flying in manual mode and you had some issues up there, you easily can switch it over into sport or normal. It'll just go back into GPS mode. And ideally, if you have enough time, it'll just come back around and start hovering there in GPS or sport mode, just like we had on the first gen FPV. And speaking of those three different modes, normal, sport, as well as manual, the speeds on each one is a little bit different. Now, even though this remote control is an accessory for the Avata, if you do have this remote control from the first gen FPV, good news for you guys, this one, as well as the motion controller and the original FPV goggles, they will all work with the new Avata. There's something about it that you just really have to fly it. I always talked about that initially when I flew the first FPV drone, because for me as a GPS flyer, it was a big jump. I didn't know what to expect with it. And it was actually a pretty good transitional drone. However, I did talk before that it was a very powerful, loud type of drone, and I felt like they needed a smaller platform to start with. And this, I think, like I talked about earlier, probably should have been the first or initial FPV release that DJI came out with instead of that first larger scale FPV drone. As always, if you guys know my channel, I'm gonna have a ton of different individual videos going through all the details of the drone, motion controller, remote control, all the accessories, and of course, the new goggles. If you guys got some value from this video, a big like would be much appreciated. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel and turn that bell notification on so you guys know when I start posting more videos on this right here, the DJI Avata. Huge thanks again to Adobe Stock for sponsoring this video. This is Aldrin Stasio with FlytPath.com. I'll see you guys out there with the new DJI Avata. Take care.